Fall 2019. I was 29 years old and about 3 years into working as a private investigator in southern West Virginia. Most of my work involved insurance fraud, missing spouses, and the occasional background check. Missing person cases almost never paid well, but they were the ones I always accepted. The woman who hired me introduced herself as Karen Ellis. She carried a 3-ring binder instead of a purse. Every document inside had plastic sleeves, school photos, copies of police reports, phone bills, receipts, maps with yellow highlighter marking places her son had supposedly been seen. Her son, Dylan, had disappeared almost 8 months earlier. The sheriff's department had stopped active searches after the first few weeks. Karen hadn't. She looked exhausted in the way only someone chasing answers for months can. "I don't need miracles," she told me over coffee. "I just need somebody who'll keep looking." I told her I'd try. Most people think private investigators spend their time chasing cheating spouses through hotel parking lots. Sometimes that's true. But missing person investigations are mostly driving. Driving empty highways, walking neighborhoods, talking to cashiers who vaguely remember someone, checking motel registers, reviewing hours of security footage where nothing happens. The first week wasn't exciting. I interviewed Dylan's old co-workers, his landlord, his mechanic, the owner of a small gun store he'd visited once. Everyone described him almost exactly the same way. Quiet, reliable, always wore the same faded gray hoodie. Nobody had a bad thing to say. One detail kept coming up. About a month before disappearing, Dylan became convinced someone was following him. His friends laughed about it. One of them even told me, "Dylan watched too many crime documentaries." Another shrugged. He was probably stressed. Even Karen rolled her eyes when I asked. He mentioned seeing the same pickup truck a few times. What kind? He couldn't remember. Color? I think white. Maybe silver. She sighed. I honestly thought he was just imagining things. That became my first dead end. No plate number. No make. No useful description. Just a truck. Still, I wrote it down. You never know what matters later. Dylan had rented a small cabin outside town. The owner let me inside. Nothing looked disturbed. Dust covered the kitchen counter. Mail sat unopened. A calendar still hung on March. His toothbrush remained beside the sink. People don't usually stage disappearing that way. I photographed everything. Near the front door I noticed something odd. 3 screws had recently been replaced in the deadbolt. The owner shrugged. Probably Dylan. You know why? He said somebody messed with his lock. You checked. I couldn't find anything. Neither could I. At least not then. It became another tiny note inside my notebook. By the second week, I was mostly retracing old police work. Trail cameras. Gas stations. Abandoned campgrounds. One deputy admitted, "We exhausted everything." You sure? As sure as we can be. You think he left voluntarily? The deputy leaned back. I think people disappear every day. That answer bothered me. Not because it was impossible. Because it sounded practiced. Then I found something police hadn't. A storage unit Dylan rented under a different address. Karen didn't know about it. The manager almost refused access until I produced paperwork. Inside wasn't furniture or boxes. Just shelves. Filled with notebooks. Every notebook contained dates, times, license plates, descriptions of vehicles, locations. At first I assumed he'd become paranoid. Then I noticed something. The same partial plate appeared 27 different times. Different towns. Different months. Always ending in 7 kilojoules. That wasn't coincidence. Someone had been nearby, repeatedly. Whoever followed him had become predictable enough for Dylan to notice patterns. Suddenly the truck story didn't sound crazy anymore. I called Karen. You never mentioned notebooks. What notebooks? I don't think your son imagined any of this. Silence. Then she whispered, Oh. That evening someone called me. Blocked number. A man's voice. Calm. You should stop. I asked. Who is this? Click. That was it. I figured someone disliked investigators. It happens. I ignored it. The next morning, every tire on my SUV had been deflated. Not slashed. Just emptied. No fingerprints. No note. Nothing. The sheriff took a report. He sounded bored. Kids. Maybe. Except none of the nearby security cameras captured anyone. 3 days later, I found the notebook I used for field notes sitting on my motel bed. I hadn't left it there. I'd locked it inside my vehicle. Inside, someone had written one sentence across an empty page. You miss Tuesdays. I froze. Because they were right. I had overlooked Tuesdays. Every recurring plate sighting happened on Tuesdays. Not Mondays. Not random days. Only Tuesdays. Whoever wrote that message had read every page of my notes. They'd also been inside my locked SUV. I checked the motel cameras. Nothing. No usable footage. The hallway camera malfunctioned for 27 minutes. Exactly long enough. I drove every Tuesday route Dylan had documented. The fourth Tuesday changed everything. Around 6:40 p.m., I noticed an older white pickup parked beside an abandoned logging road. No plates. Just mounting brackets. The engine was still warm. I called the sheriff. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. No one came. So I walked. The road disappeared into dense trees. Fresh tire tracks. Fresh boot prints. About half a mile in, I found another notebook. Mine. Not Dylan's. Mine. Pages torn out. One sentence written inside. Turn around. I heard footsteps. Not running. Walking. Behind me. Slow. Measured. I turned. Nobody. Just trees. Wind. The sound stopped. Then it started again. Closer. I backed toward the road. Didn't run. Not yet. Another step. Another. Branches moved. Still no person. I finally ran. By the time I reached my SUV, the white pickup was gone. So was my notebook. I dropped it. Or thought I had. It wasn't anywhere. Neither were the footprints I'd followed. Rain hadn't fallen. The ground simply looked untouched. The sheriff finally returned my call 2 hours later. They searched the logging road the next morning. Nothing. No truck. No prints. No notebook. No evidence anyone had been there. Karen cried when I told her everything. She apologized for thinking Dylan imagined it. I didn't know what to say, because I had started out thinking exactly the same thing. I closed the investigation 6 weeks later. Officially, there wasn't enough evidence to continue. Unofficially, I still think someone spent months watching Dylan, and then watched me. I keep one copy of Dylan's notebooks locked in a safe. Every now and then I reread them. There's one detail I didn't notice until almost a year later. Mixed into all those pages were descriptions of people. Cashiers. Neighbors. Deputies. Delivery drivers. People he'd spoken to. Beside one deputy's name, Dylan had written only 4 words. He already knows me. I still don't know what he meant. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Summer, 2021. I was 34 years old and had been working as a private investigator in Las Vegas for almost 8 years. Most of my assignments involved divorce cases because, in this city, people made a lot of bad decisions they thought nobody would ever see. At the time, I figured this would be another routine surveillance job. The client was a software executive from Phoenix. He believed his wife was meeting someone during a business conference at a luxury hotel on the Strip. He wasn't interested in confrontation. He just wanted proof. I wasn't proud of those jobs, but they paid my rent. The hotel itself was exactly what you'd expect. Marble floors polished enough to reflect the chandeliers, the constant hum of slot machines drifting in from the casino, and tourists dragging expensive luggage through the lobby at every hour. For 3 days, nothing unusual happened. The woman attended conference sessions in the morning. She had dinner with coworkers. She spent hours in the hotel lounge answering emails. She wasn't sneaking around. She wasn't meeting anyone. If anything, I was beginning to think my client had wasted his money. I almost ended the case early. Then I noticed something small. Every evening around 8:15, she would answer her cell phone. She'd never speak. She would simply listen for 15 or 20 seconds. Then she'd hang up. No expression. No visible reaction. Just back to whatever she had been doing. The first time, I assumed it was spam. The second time, coincidence. By the fourth night, I couldn't ignore the pattern. I mentioned it to another investigator I occasionally worked with. He laughed. Maybe someone's trying to sell her an extended car warranty. I laughed too. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. The conference ended on Friday. Instead of checking out, she extended her stay by 1 night. That wasn't unusual. People often turned work trips into mini vacations. She spent most of Saturday wandering through nearby shops while I kept my distance. Around sunset, she returned to the hotel. At exactly 8:15, her phone rang. Again. She answered. Listened. Hung up. This time she looked over both shoulders before walking quickly toward the elevators. I followed. She went to the 12th floor. Instead of entering her room, she stopped in the hallway. She stood perfectly still, almost like she was waiting for someone. No one came. After nearly a minute, she finally went inside. Nothing else happened. Later that night, I reviewed my notes in my room. Around 11:40 p.m., my hotel room phone rang. Not my cell. The room phone. I answered. A familiar voice said, "You can stop following her now." My stomach dropped. It was my client. Same voice. Same calm way of speaking. I immediately asked, "How did you get this room number?" Silence. Then, a soft laugh. The line disconnected. I called my client using my cell phone. He answered immediately. Before I could speak, he said, "Everything okay?" I asked where he'd been for the last 5 minutes. "Home." "You haven't called me?" "No." His confusion sounded genuine. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No record of the room phone call. The hotel operator confirmed someone had called my room, but the call showed as originating from another room inside the hotel. They couldn't tell me which one. The next morning, I requested checkout records for my client to reimburse expenses. While standing at the front desk, I casually asked if anyone else had requested my room number. The employee shook her head. "No." "Nobody?" "No, sir." As I turned to leave, another employee quietly said, "Excuse me." He waited until his coworker walked away. "Did someone call your room last night?" I nodded. He frowned. "You're the third guest this month." "What do you mean?" "They all reported calls. Wrong numbers." They said the caller sounded exactly like someone they knew. Before I could ask another question, his manager appeared. The employee immediately changed the subject, almost like he regretted saying anything. I should have walked away. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. I extended my own stay. That afternoon, I requested surveillance footage covering the hallway outside my room. Hotel security refused. Privacy policy. Fair enough. I couldn't argue with that, so I waited. At 11:40 p.m., the room phone rang again. I didn't answer. It rang 6 times. Stopped. 5 seconds later, someone knocked on my door. 3 slow knocks. I looked through the peephole. Nobody. The hallway was empty. I opened the door anyway. Nothing. Just the long carpeted corridor stretching toward the elevators. When I looked down, there was a room key card on the floor. No envelope. No note. Just a key. Written across it with black marker. 1508. Room 1508. It wasn't my floor. I took the elevator. The 15th floor was almost silent. I found room 1508 near the end of the hallway. The door stood slightly open, just enough to notice darkness inside. I knocked. No answer. I pushed gently. The room was empty. No luggage. No toiletries. No signs anyone had stayed there, except the bedside phone. It was off the hook. A dial tone echoed through the room. Then the speaker clicked. Someone inhaled. Very quietly. Then my own voice said, "Who's there?" Exactly how I'd said it a few seconds earlier. Word for word. I didn't wait. I hung up the phone and left. Fast. Back in my room, I packed everything. Laptop. Camera. Hard drives. I wanted out. As I zipped my bag, my cell phone rang. It was my client. "I've been trying to reach you. I've got enough. You got proof?" "No." A pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this isn't about your wife anymore." Before he could answer, someone knocked again. 3 slow knocks. Exactly the same. I looked through the peephole. This time someone was standing there. Hotel security. At least, that's what the uniform said. He smiled politely. "Sir." "Yes." "We received a complaint about loud voices. I've been alone. I understand." He never stopped smiling. "Could you open the door?" Something felt wrong. I asked to see identification. He held up a badge. Too quickly. Couldn't read it. I called the front desk while keeping one eye on the peephole. "Can you send security to my room?" The employee answered immediately. "Sir, our security team is currently responding to a medical emergency downstairs." I looked back through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No elevator sound. Nobody walking away. Just gone. I left anyway. I carried everything to the parking garage without stopping. As I loaded my SUV, I realized my room key wasn't in my pocket anymore. I figured I'd dropped it upstairs. Then I noticed it sitting under my windshield wiper. Next to it was another key card. The one marked 1508. I know I hadn't taken it with me. I threw both cards into a trash can outside the garage. I drove straight back to Phoenix without sleeping. A week later, the hotel manager called. Housekeeping had found one of my business cards in room 1508. He wanted to know if I'd been inside. I told him the truth. "Yes." He paused. "Sir, that room has been out of service for renovations." "For how long?" "Almost 4 months." I didn't answer. Neither did he. Eventually he just thanked me and ended the call. My client eventually hired another investigator. As far as I know, he never proved his wife was cheating. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe none of that had anything to do with her. I still take surveillance jobs. But I have one rule now. If a hotel room phone rings after midnight, I don't answer it. And if someone outside my door sounds exactly like a person I trust, I don't open it. Late October 2018. I was 37 years old and had been working as a licensed private investigator in Northern Ontario for almost a decade. Most of my work involved insurance claims, fraud investigations, and locating people who didn't want to be found. When a law firm hired me to inspect an abandoned property connected to a decades-old missing person case, it sounded like one of the easiest jobs I'd had all year. The property sat nearly 2 hours outside the nearest town. The gravel road leading to it wasn't even marked on most GPS apps. The instructions from the law firm were simple. Photograph the house. Confirm whether anyone was living there. Document anything valuable before the property changed ownership. That was it. No mystery. No danger. Just paperwork. The local records showed the cabin had belonged to an elderly man who disappeared sometime in the late 1990s. His family had died off over the years, and after years of legal disputes, the estate was finally being settled. Nobody had entered the property in a long time. At least that was the official story. Before leaving town, I stopped at the small police detachment to let someone know where I'd be. It was standard practice whenever I had to work in remote areas. The desk sergeant glanced at the address. His expression changed for just a second. "You heading out there alone?" "Yeah." He hesitated. "If you finish before dark, don't stay." I smiled. "I wasn't planning to." He nodded without smiling back. "Good." That was the entire conversation. I figured he'd simply dealt with too many hunters getting stranded overnight. Nothing more. The drive took almost 3 hours because the last stretch of road had washed out in several places. By the time I arrived, the sun was already low. The cabin looked exactly like the photos from the property file. Weathered cedar siding, a rusted metal roof, a collapsed woodshed leaning into a line of spruce trees. No tire tracks. No fresh footprints. No smoke from the chimney. The place appeared abandoned. I spent the first 40 minutes taking photographs. Every room was covered in dust. Old furniture remained exactly where someone had left it years earlier. There were faded family photos on the walls. A calendar still hung open to September. Not this September. September 1998. It felt less like entering an abandoned house and more like stepping into a paused moment. The basement door was locked. According to the paperwork, there wasn't supposed to be anything stored downstairs. That struck me as odd. Why lock an empty basement? After a little searching, I found a spare key taped beneath a kitchen drawer. It worked. The basement wasn't empty. Shelves lined one wall. Most were bare. But in the far corner sat 3 metal filing cabinets. Every drawer had already been opened. Completely empty. Whoever cleared them out had done it carefully. Too carefully. Dust covered everything except the cabinet handles. Those looked newly polished, as if someone had touched them recently. I took several photos and headed back upstairs. That's when I heard a vehicle. Just for a second. Gravel crunching. Then silence. I walked outside. My SUV was exactly where I'd parked it. No other vehicles. The road beyond the trees was empty. I even shut off my camera so I could listen. Nothing. Just wind moving through the pines. I told myself sound traveled strangely in the woods. It happens. I went back inside. I finished photographing the upstairs bedrooms. The last room belonged to a child. There were toy trucks lined neatly along a windowsill. A small bookshelf. Crayon drawings taped to the wall. One drawing caught my attention. It showed the cabin, pickup truck, and a stick figure standing among the trees. Across the top, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "He comes every Tuesday. Kids write strange things." I snapped a picture and moved on. As the sun disappeared, I packed my equipment. Then I noticed something that made me stop. The front door was closed. I knew I'd left it open. I distinctly remembered using a doorstop because the frame kept swinging shut. The doorstop was still on the floor, 3 feet away. The door shouldn't have been closed. I opened it again. The air outside had gone completely still. Not a single branch moved. I suddenly had the feeling that staying any longer would be a mistake. I headed toward my SUV. It wouldn't start. The battery had been fine all day. Now the dashboard flickered once and died. I tried my satellite phone. No signal. Not unusual, but frustrating. I decided to walk back to the road where reception was usually better. I had barely reached the tree line when I saw headlights. Someone was driving toward the cabin. Finally. Help. I stepped into the road and waved. The truck slowed. Stopped about 50 yards away. Its headlights remained on. The driver's door never opened. Neither did the passenger door. After almost a minute, the truck reversed. Slowly. Without turning around. Then disappeared into the darkness. I hurried back to the cabin and locked every door. For the first time all day, I felt genuinely uneasy. I called the police detachment over the satellite messenger's emergency text feature. The message went through. No reply. 10 minutes. Nothing. 20 minutes. Still nothing. Outside, I heard footsteps crossing the porch. One end. Then the other. No knocking. Just slow footsteps. I switched off every light and waited. The footsteps stopped directly outside the living room window. Someone was there. I couldn't see anything beyond my own reflection in the glass. Then, a flashlight swept once across the yard. Not searching. Almost signaling. It disappeared. Nearly an hour later, another vehicle approached. This time it was unmistakably a police SUV. Relief hit me instantly. Blue emergency lights flashed between the trees. A uniformed officer stepped onto the porch. He knocked twice. Police. I opened the door. There was only one officer. He looked tired. You called? Yeah. I think someone's been outside. He looked around with his flashlight. I don't see anyone. I heard footsteps. He nodded. Mind showing me? We walked around the cabin together. No footprints. No tire tracks. Nothing. It had been dry for days. There should have been something. Instead, the ground looked untouched. The officer eventually shrugged. Probably wildlife. I know the difference. I'm sure you do. His tone wasn't rude. Just final. Before leaving, he handed me a business card. If anything else happens, call. Then he drove away. The next morning, I finally got my SUV started. The battery acted as though nothing had ever been wrong. I drove straight back into town. At the police detachment, I asked to speak with the officer who had responded overnight. The woman behind the desk frowned. What officer? The one you sent. She searched the logbook. No units were dispatched to that address. I stared at her. He gave me his card. I reached into my jacket. The card was gone. I checked every pocket. My camera bag. My notebook. Nothing. It had simply disappeared. Another officer overheard the conversation. What time was this? I told him. He became unusually quiet. Then he asked one question. The SUV. What about it? Did it have roof lights? Yes. He looked toward the woman at the desk. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally he said, We retired our last SUV with roof lights like that. Almost 6 years ago. A week later, the law firm called. They'd reviewed my photographs. One image hadn't been taken by me. At least I had no memory of taking it. It was the final file on the memory card. The timestamp placed it at 2:17 a.m., long after I'd stopped using the camera. The photo showed the cabin from outside. My SUV sat in the driveway. The living room lights were on. Someone was standing in the upstairs window, watching the camera. I assumed it was me, until I zoomed in. I was asleep downstairs at 2:17 a.m., and whoever stood in that window was wearing what looked like an old police uniform. The police searched the property again. They found nothing. No recent visitors. No evidence anyone had lived there. No explanation for the extra photograph. The law firm eventually sold the land. The cabin was demolished the following spring. Officially, the file is closed. Unofficially, I still have that last photograph stored on an external hard drive. I've looked at it hundreds of times. Every time I zoom in, I notice some tiny detail I missed before. But there's one thing I refuse to check again. In the lower corner of the image, just beyond the edge of the porch, it looks like someone else was taking the picture. And if that's true, who was standing behind the camera?